All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for the next session in the Media and Family track within Summit. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator and panelists for this session on male eating disorders from lived experience to advocacy. Our moderator today is Allison Walsh. Allison is a seasoned executive philanthropist, speaker, professional coach, and consultant with over 15 years of organizational leadership, mentorship, and coaching experience. She is the Vice President of Business Development and Branding for Advanced Recovery Systems, where she's also been instrumental in the development of their mental wellness app, Nobu. Allison is also a podcast host and member of the Forbes Business Development Council, Entrepreneur Leadership Network, and the Orlando Business Journal Leadership Trust. Allison's raised over $2 million for eating disorder education and treatment through her nonprofit, Helping Other People Eat or HOPE. And she serves on the boards for the Forever's Foundation, Project Opioid, and the National Alliance for Eating Disorders. Our panelists today are Abhilash Patel and William Hornby. Abhilash is the co-founder and president of Within Health. He has a track record as a proven entrepreneur, marketer, and venture investor. Prior to co-founding Within Health, Abhilash led some of the most successful digital businesses in healthcare, including RankLab, a digital marketing agency that helped scale some of the largest behavioral health operators in the country, and Recovery Brands, a digital publisher with assets including rehabs.com and recovery.org. In 2015, Abhilash oversaw the acquisition of both companies to a publicly traded healthcare organization. Our second panelist today is William Hornby. William is a speaker, advocate, and singer at the forefront of raising awareness for men with eating disorders. He speaks publicly on advocacy, mental health, and eating disorder recovery. Travels around the world, both in person and virtually, giving workshops and presentations, including The Power of Becoming the Advocate You Needed, which was a presentation we saw yesterday. He is the recipient of the William Donald Schaefer Helping People Award for 2021, and has collaborated with the National Alliance for Eating Disorders and the National Eating Disorder Association. It's a mouthful. With that, I will hand it over to you, Allison. Take it away.
Thank you, Zach. And I'm so excited to have this conversation today. We were chatting before we even got started that this is such a necessary conversation. And I'm thrilled to be joined by such accomplished gentlemen today to have this conversation. So wanted to really kick it off and get started with asking both of you the same question about how you became the advocate that you really needed. And I'd love to get started with Abhilash, if that's okay. And then I'll switch over to William.
Man, I was really hoping we would start with William.
We can, if you like.
I have no idea how to answer this question. I learned from William. Can we start with you, William?
Sure, absolutely.
Sure, we can. So my entire presentation is about becoming the advocate you needed. My little long story short of how I became the advocate I needed is I was really struggling with my eating disorder. I had been undiagnosed for about 9 years. I got a diagnosis from my therapist and worked on it with my dietitian. The diagnosis was OSFED, which is other specified feeding or eating disorders. And when I received that diagnosis, I went, oh, so it's not a real eating disorder, and continued to not focus on recovery. And eventually that came crashing down, and I did start focusing seriously on recovery. And one of the hardest parts of recovering for me was not being able to find any kind of online community of men talking about eating disorder recovery, or any support groups or any informational pages that really helped with it. There was nothing. And then I was like, maybe I'm going about this wrong. And so I had my dietitian and my therapist look for resources for me. And they also came up short with nothing, essentially. One of them gave me the one page on NIDA's website about men's eating disorders, but it doesn't really provide any substance. And there was really just nothing. Ultimately, I have a really great support system, and my therapist and my dietitian are incredible people. And so I also have healthcare, which is a really important part of this equation. I got to thinking later on in my recovery, it would have been great if I had had someone who was openly talking about it. No one was. And I was like, I could be what I needed for other people. And so I started doing that. And as any seasoned business person would know, Allison, when you start doing something that no one else is doing, it grows very quickly. And so it grew very quickly. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I really, really focused on like getting information from my therapist, from my dietitian, and eventually became friends and entered community with dietitians online, therapists online, fat activists online, and I've been so humbled by the opportunity to learn from all of these incredible professionals and activists, and I have become a professional advocate by not necessarily mistake, but definitely not on purpose either.
Well, you're doing amazing work, and we need individuals like yourself to share their stories, to be the advocates, to create change. And Abhilash, I know your story is a big, huge reason why you're doing what you're doing now, and you're advocating for so many people to be able to get the care that they need. But would you mind just sharing a little bit more about that?
Sure. And thank you, William. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, William, for sharing that. It's inspiring. I love the commitment and the clarity of purpose. It fills me up. And I'm as you were talking or speaking, and Allison, as you were asking your questions, I'm thinking to myself, like, what does it mean to really be an advocate, right? Like, what does that mean? There's a lot of ways that we can think about that. And to me, right, I guess maybe in the simplest sense, it's how are we helping to how are we helping others to get the help they need, right, to alleviate their suffering. And there are a lot of ways of doing that. When we were speaking before about the people who, there's so few voices, right, that are advocating for men who are suffering. There's just not enough of them. And I'll talk about my story, but the conversation at all, what we're doing here, talking about the fact that not only, we all know that eating disorders do affect men, but how important it is to keep this conversation going. I was able to have this conversation with the amazing people at the Alliance a while ago who had this conversation also. These are important, right? I think there's momentum and they snowball, and it's incredibly important that we continue to shine light, because there's stigma and there's generalization and there is shame. And so that's where, how did I become the advocate I needed? I don't know is the answer. But yet here we are. And the story is, I think, was really similar to William's, which is that I think, in my experience, change comes from pain, right? Like, pain's the great motivator. And for me, it was the same, right? I've said this before, when I was sick, my eating disorder, look, I'm a long time in recovery and sober from alcohol and drugs, but my eating disorder predated that. And I didn't need a diagnosis because it was bulimia. Like, I don't think I didn't need someone to tell me what was going on. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that I knew that it was an eating disorder, and I leaned into it. And even then, when I wanted help, there was no one talking to me. And so I stayed sick. And because everyone I was ready to ask for help, they were busy helping other people that didn't look like me. And ultimately, I think when I was in enough pain to ask for help and to keep doing it, I had a journey that was different from getting sober from alcohol and drugs. My journey in eating disorder recovery has been very, very different. And I'm so grateful when I met and got to spend more time with Wendy, and I learned more about the field and the community and the approach of intuitive eating. I see, wow, like there's a lot of love here. Like this makes sense to me. And it completely changed my recovery in a way that I'm really grateful for. And so now, right, this happened in addiction too. And it's amazing how the stars aligned. In addiction, it used to be a moral failing, right? Like it was their fault, and they just need to get some willpower. But that conversation changed, right? We know it's a disease now. It's not a big deal. Like we just get help to people when they need it. The same will happen in eating disorder recovery. But the men who are sick are ashamed and are unwilling to speak about it and are unwilling to ask for help. And the same with, just like it is with suicide, just like it is with sexual assault often, or abuse, children, sexual abuse. The more we talk about it and make it okay, I feel like the more people that are gonna, that are gonna be able to get the help they need. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how I became that advocate. It's becoming more clear to me that there aren't many other people to do it. So, so here we are, right? It's just what needs to happen. I think for the collective welfare, if we put we first, good things happen.
And you're doing incredible things, and you're creating a way for people to get well as well, right? And so I think that's pretty powerful, and the impact that you're making in so many people's lives, in addition to sharing your story and helping hopefully inspire them to have brave conversations, to put themselves first and take care of themselves. But you're also creating a pathway for people to be able to get the services that they need, so that they don't feel alone and they don't feel that there's somebody that's not available to treat them, which I think is really, really critically important. And so I want to kind of transition this part of the conversation to talk about, if somebody is struggling in private, another male that's struggling with their eating disorder, what can others do to help them, right? Understanding that they probably feel very alone or feel very isolated, or that, they're different than others, or there's not those resources that are available to everybody else. They don't feel like they're available to them. What advice would you give, William, to those that maybe are listening, or that know somebody who's struggling? What advice would you give them to help others that are struggling in private right now?
So first, I would say it's really important to make sure that you are a safe space for that person. Men are often very disinclined to share anything that's going on in their lives. Liz Plank actually writes about in For the Love of Men, this trend, specifically in Western men, of needing to get drunk before really opening up to other men. And another thing she writes about is how specifically men in relationships with women tend to treat that woman as not only their only close friend, but as their entire support system emotionally, as their therapist, and as a person who is the only person they're opening up to. So a lot of men, if they're single, don't have anyone that they're opening up to. And if you have a man in your life that you're really concerned about, it's important to let them know that you are a safe place for them to talk about their feelings. It's really important to know, especially as a non-man in those situations, that men will probably feel more willing to open up to you because you're not another man, and they will feel like their masculinity isn't as much of a risk of being affected by opening up and having this conversation. Not that that puts the responsibility on you to be that person for them, but if you care about them and you want to be that person, that is definitely a thing that you can consent to do for that man in your life that you really care about. ultimately, no one takes kindly to accusations. And anything presented as an accusation is going to, or even not presented as an accusation, but anything that can come across as an accusation is not going to be received well. So if you sit this man in your life down and you're like, I think you might have an eating disorder, they're probably going to take that not only as an attack, but also as an attack on their masculinity, because eating disorders are so feminized. So you really want to just make sure that you are in open emotional communication with this man, and really, maybe lead them into talking about their relationship with food and their body, without very obviously doing it. And as they open up, and as you are sharing that like vulnerability together, as it's a more vulnerable open space, then you might want to work in like, hey, it might be a good idea to like go meet with a registered dietitian just to make sure that like nothing's going on, or like it might be good to check out this therapist. I can help you find a therapist. It might help you to have a therapist. And like really presenting it logically as like, even if nothing is going on right now, it's probably good to have like a support system, an objective third party in your life, someone who you can fall on if you do fall. And so really like baby steps guiding them into this idea of welcoming mental health support into their lives. And then hopefully the mental health professionals will be able to take it from there, and you can just support them in like checking in, like, did you reach out to that dietitian? Are you continuing to see that dietitian? And that is, I think, the best way to go about encouraging a man to get treatment for an eating disorder. Definitely steering away from the term eating disorder is a good way to go about it.
Thank you for that. Abhilash, do you have anything to add?
And that was great. I feel like there was, actionable insights and real practical scenarios and advice is going to be really useful. I was thinking back, and I don't know, it was only a few times that people ever talked to me, and it was never a male, right? So I think being aware of that dynamic is important. If it's a female talking to a male, I love that concept of not threatening masculinity, but I think creating the safe space is really important. We go to a neutral location. We, it's not a conversation we're having over food. It's a conversation that we have in a neutral place. And I set the table, so to speak, by saying, can I talk to you about something that's really important to me, and know that this is just a completely private conversation that stays right here, that never goes anywhere else, but that is really, really safe because I want to talk to you about this. Vulnerability begets vulnerability, right? Like I create that safety by being vulnerable myself, and I demonstrate that there's trust here. I think that's really important. If someone had come to me, I would have first denied it. I would have first, fought it, and played it off. And so, if we're helping someone who's actually in the illness, I got to know that that's, probably likely, but that it's still amazing that I'm giving oxygen to this conversation, right? It's something that progresses, and when the person's ready, they'll be ready. But my hope is that by giving some oxygen to the conversation, now all of a sudden there's an inkling of that awareness, and I've got to believe that grows, right? Because now I've created, like William said beautifully, a person, if I'm going to be that person that they can go to. So, I just think having the courage to do that is amazing, but I do absolutely recommend awareness and neutrality and safety in that conversation. And then the ability to provide resources that are confidential and private and secure, because there's so much shame and secrecy and hiding involved that we don't want to threaten that.
Really great advice from both of you. I think one other thing that has been helpful in the past, knowing and entering into those conversations, is having some resources prepared in case that individual is ready to say yes and to do something about it, and even offering to be there when they make the call. And that's been really helpful in my experience as well, of just having done some of the legwork, because it can be an emotional conversation to begin with, but then even just a subtle slide of resources of like, when you're ready.
Amazing. Imagine that, right? Like, imagine you're having a conversation. If someone had it with me and at the right time, it would have been, wow, I've been fighting this for years, right? I've been ashamed of this for years, and I don't know what to do. And here you come, right, to save that person's life. And if you have the resources ready, think about what an incredible change you can have. On one hand, we can focus on the potential blowback and the difficulty and the fear that there is with having this conversation. But on the other, we could focus on the opportunity, right, of how much change and how much freedom and how much liberty this person can get to be the person they're supposed to be.
Absolutely. It can be life-changing. And so before I go into the next question, I do want to encourage individuals to drop questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. I'm going to save some space for that. And I see we've already got somebody that has done that, so thank you. But I would like to turn the conversation to stigma, because I think that we've talked a little bit about it, right, throughout all of this, but there does tend to be a higher level of stigma. And I really would love for us to create a movement of change when it comes to that, and really help to reduce stigma. So what do you think as a society? And I know that's a big question, William, to start off with, like, as a society, what can we do to reduce stigma when it comes to males with eating disorders? But I'd love to hear your thoughts as to what you think would be at least the next right step, or some suggestions that we could create a positive change.
I mean, a lot of stigma is rooted in access to privilege. So, like, things that are stigmatizing are things that are threatening to your privilege, is what I would say. Like, for example, the stigma around like race in this country is rooted in the unwillingness of white people to give up privilege and allow other people to have the access to the resources that they do in life, you know? And so how that relates to the stigma around men's mental health in general and men's eating disorders is that really, like, the patriarchy that we live in stigmatizes mental health for men. It stigmatizes specifically access to treatment for mental health for men, because that comes with opening up, and that comes with being empathetic, and with being willing to accept help into your life, right? And a lot of the like band-aid solutions to this stigma around like men's mental health and men's men's eating disorders is this idea that, like, we say, actually reaching out for help is manly, and actually, like, taking responsibility for your mental health is manly, whereas like the issue is that gendered aspect of things. The fact that, like, not asking for help is considered manly is like a big part of this equation. And so really deconstructing the ways that we all participate in and encourage toxic masculinity is a really important part of decreasing the stigma around men's eating disorders, because it's a well-known thing that like suicide rates for men are higher because men are more successful at suicide, that men are often the perpetrators behind femicide and also homicide, because that's how we teach our men to emote, by fighting through aggression. And eating disorders are definitely a part of masculinity in our culture. You've got a lot of accounts on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok that are telling you the only real way to be a man is to follow that ancient Greek philosopher principle of like achieving the greatest thing that your body is capable of, and by training and eating in a way to get to that peak physical form. Now that is truly what being a man is about. And because that is so intrinsically linked to masculinity in our society, simply bringing visibility to men with eating disorders is not enough. It's a group project, if you will, of no longer gendering things like reaching out for help. You know, yeah, that's what I'd say about that on a societal level. The biggest problem when it comes to men's eating disorders is the way that eating disorders are gendered, and that a lot of men see their disordered behavior as a tool for furthering what makes them a man.
Thank you for that. And I can completely agree on so many levels there. And I think it's so critically important that we continue to have these conversations and we continue to talk about it, and men continue to share their experiences. And I know before we even got started today, we were talking about what was it like a decade plus ago when I got started in advocacy, and has it changed a lot? And unfortunately, it really hasn't as much, right? As I think we all would have hoped to see more men talking about it, sharing their experiences, because there's strength in stories, right? And people can see themselves in others. And sometimes that's exactly what they need to see, to know that they're not alone, that there is help available, that recovery is possible, that all of those things, right? Just like we're all searching for whenever we're struggling with anything, but there's not as much available. And I think that's where we can do even more. So Abhilash, what do you think from a societal perspective and reducing stigma? What else can we be doing?
I'm just thinking again about some of the larger questions. William, it's a very nuanced and insightful I think lens that you've brought to it, right? Like, what is the relationship between the stigma of eating disorders at all, but then also the concept of masculinity as it exists in our kind of zeitgeist, and even more above that, like mental health at all, right? And that's a tough one, right? I think that a couple things are going on here, because I don't know that diet culture is another one, right? I think you were kind of speaking to it.
Anti-fatness is like a system that diet culture is like built on. So like really any like systemic form of oppression also provides privilege. And there's a fear in that like most privileged person of like letting go any of their privilege, because they know that their life is better based on those systems. And so like thin people, of course, who benefit from being thin, do not want to give up their power to people who are fat. But like, and that is really what diet culture is built on. So yeah, that is absolutely a part of it.
And these are, they can get obtuse, but I can say, we know categorically that diet culture is very, very real. Privilege is very, very real. Masculinity and toxic masculinity is real. I don't know that in terms of an order of operations, we're going to relieve those things first or quickly. What I can say is that, like I said before, right, we have seen the tenor and the attitude towards addiction change, maybe in some ways because the problem was so bad, and again, there was so much pain that we just had to, but and I hope that's not the case here, but I have to believe that, because I've seen it, right, that stigma can lighten, but it took a lot of people spending a lot of effort. Here, where it begins with eating disorders, I don't disagree that, there are all these headwinds like masculinity and diet culture and these other things we're talking about. But in our language together, right, as people in the field, as people helping others, as advocates, as clinicians and others who are focused on this population, if we can shade our language and the notes that we use, the frequencies that we operate on, if we can be aware of it and be more inclusive of all, right, and include those conversations about that make space for men too. When we talk about men, often when clinicians are talking about men, they're talking about them in the role of the caregiver or the supportive person to the person that's suffering from the eating disorder, right? And I hear that and it's like, oh, men are really important in this world because they need to be there to support and be, this is the language that you use to help the person who's suffering from the eating disorder. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that kind of sucks, right? Like, I don't disagree, but men also suffer from the eating disorder. Who's talking to them? And that, right? If we can have this conversation, if we can be mindful as clinicians, as caretakers, when we do not just care for men, but care for women too, care for non-binary people too, care for everybody, that's going to help, because we look for progress, not perfection, right? If I can do more today than I did yesterday, then I'm in a better place to do more tomorrow. And that's what I'm after. I'm not after solving the problem. I'm after just getting a little bit louder, right? And I think if we do that, good things are going to happen. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know in what order, like is masculinity going to get sort of canceled first before we get to tackle diet culture and Noom and all of that shit? Or are we going to be able to solve, make it okay for men to ask for help for their eating disorders first? I don't know, but I can say that if we get a little bit louder and if we collectively, as people who are in the space, think about the words we use and the way we speak with each other and the way we reach out to others for help, good things are going to happen. We will be making progress and we're getting louder together. And that is what I think is the best thing we could possibly do, is be after progress, not perfection, so to speak.
I absolutely agree with that. And obviously what I was talking about before was not like an actionable recommendation of like what we as a society can do tomorrow to completely like
I get that. It was insightful. Like you're putting color on these things that are absolutely there. Like it's true, right? If we want to solve for relieving this stigma, we have to look at it this way. That's really insight. That was astute. I just don't know.
It's the canvas with which all of this exists on, right? And like we're talking about like modifying the painting while still painting on the same canvas. And obviously it would be like really great to just switch to another canvas, but you're absolutely right. We are on this canvas and we are modifying this painting. And so like
that metaphor worked, William.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm good at
metaphor. Worked the whole way. At the beginning, I thought it was sketch, but that was a beautiful metaphor by the end.
Thank you. So what we can do about this painting, per se, is we need more. This is where advocacy really comes in, which is we need more men to be talking about their eating disorders publicly. Unfortunately, our healthcare system operates on supply and demand, like everything else in this capitalistic hellscape. So the thing about supply and demand is when there's no demand, no one's going to be supplying the thing. When we make generalized statements like, of course we need more treatment for men with eating disorders, or of course it's like a statistically abysmal figure to look at the fact that less than 1% of all eating disorder research ever has been done on men. Like, those are great things to point out, but ultimately that won't exist for men until men start demanding recovery treatment. And so what's really important here is making sure that men who are silently struggling with eating disorders, whether they know it or not, know how to identify it in themselves, know how to reach out for help, as well as know that it's okay to ask for help. And so one of the issues that I run into with like my privilege in terms of my advocacy is that while I have a lot of privilege in a bunch of other sects of my life, I don't have the piece of being a straight man. And the issue I run into there is a lot of people who are locked into really toxic eating disorders that have been influenced by masculinity. They don't want to hear what I have to say. They see me as less of a man than them because I am gay. And so also my actions make me less of a man than them, and that I am advocating for eating disorder recovery. And I've been on the receiving end of death threats. I have been on the receiving end of horrible messages my way from men who see me as less of a man because I'm talking about this and because I'm gay. And so what's really important is that we have men that they can't attack in that way talking about eating disorder recovery. We need more straight men who are bodybuilders who had an eating disorder or have an eating disorder and are going on a recovery journey to know about how to advocate for men's eating disorders. We need people who are not just white talking about men's eating disorders. We need men who are men of color talking about men's eating disorders, because honestly, if a white man is talking about his eating disorder, a black man very well may not relate to that because he can't see himself in that person who's talking about it, because it always helps to see people with your identities talking about things that you are going through. And so it's really important that we not only foster a space and have conversations like this, but really find men like actively who are willing to talk about this and to advocate for this kind of recovery, for this kind of treatment, because that's how we get men in the masses going out and saying, I need treatment for this. And when that starts to happen, then more research will happen. More research will get funded about this. And furthermore, then recovery centers will be open to treating men because there will be more research on how to treat men. And that is, advocacy is really where this starts. And really it's not just having conversations among professionals and like, how can I make my practice more open and willing for men to come to me? It's really about encouraging men to speak up very publicly. If they have the ability to and the education to, they absolutely should, and should make it accessible and should make it so that people want to get better.
You know, thank you, William, for saying that. Couple things. One, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm really sorry that you got those messages and you get that.
Thank you.
that horse shit. I curse a bit, but I'm sorry. But I'm sorry that happened. And I was thinking about the courage it takes. And it's very courageous of you.
Well, thank you. I think that's another reason why a lot of men don't do it also, is because
Well,
they know that this is the kind of backlash they're going to get if they talk about this, and it's not easy to deal with.
maybe I don't know that that's the case. I'll look, as you were talking, as you were speaking, I'm thinking, well, shit, right? I'm a straight person, a man of color, right? Identify as a man, and I checked all those boxes that you had, that you were like, we got to find people like this. And I'm like, well, Christ. The problem is, right? I mean, look, and granted, I'm here and I did the thing with the Alliance, and it's starting, but it's not comfortable, right? The fact is, if I had to be really honest, here we have 15 people here today. Like, it's kind of scary, right? And not because I'm afraid of a backlash, right? And not because I'm afraid of tinting a reputation of some kind. My reputation, I don't really know. It's probably not that good. But it's sometimes terrifying. Here's the truth, though. People in recovery, in my experience, once they find recovery, if they develop it, and good ones, they get comfortable and they become passionate about helping others, right? And so to find more people to do that, on one hand, yes, it's looking for those and encouraging people who are in recovery, who are of whatever kind, male, to speak up. But what we're talking about doing is, lifting stigma so that more people can get help. And those people that find recovery become passionate about their recovery in early recovery, right? And now the trade is, okay, you're going to get well, you're going to get your life back. You're going to become the person that you're meant to be, because you're not going to be so ashamed all the time, every day. And now you've got to go give it away, right? And you got to go give back and do something useful. And I feel like that's going to add voices, the kind of voices you're after, right? Wisely and appropriately so. You're saying, hey, look, I'm here, I'll be first, or one of the first, and I want more people to join me, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing of what you're saying. And I love you for saying it. And I don't know that there's that many right now, because for me, like, it's just scary. I had trouble even because I knew it was going to be a part of building within, right? And one of the reasons that I'm here and that I really am passionate about what we're doing is because digitally and virtually, right, we can put groups together across state lines for men to be together and share their lived experience, because there's just not enough of them in one building, in one city, in some part of the country. And it has to be this way. And there's not that group, apart from, like, look, I get it. There's 12-step meetings, and that's fine. That didn't work for me. And so I didn't know that there was going to be a way to do it unless we just fucking did it ourselves. And so, sometimes there's not a lot of right angles. There's a little bit of chaos. It's not always pretty. And that's fine. We don't always have to agree on shit. But I think the way to add voices of the kind that you're talking about, yes, like, I'll be louder, I guess, is a commitment I'll make to you guys. But it means helping other people get well, right? Because those people are going to be louder. I don't know that there's a lot of them sort of waiting around to be given a microphone.
Which is, yeah, no, for sure. And that's part of the reason why what I said at the beginning of like encouraging the men in your life who are struggling to get help without really like labeling them and making them feel attacked in any way. It's really important that for those men who are currently, not in recovery or not open about recovery, it's really important to get them into treatment so that they can get better and then also be advocates themselves.
Representation matters across the board, and people look for points of connection, and they want to see themselves, as just a vote of confidence that they can get well too. And I think that that's really important. And I think this lends itself to this conversation, even with what Abhilash started to talk about with like creating within and creating opportunities to bring people together that have similar stories and circumstances, or identify in certain ways into groups in which they can find recovery and find connection to. There's a question that came in around any recommendations or insights or actionable steps that people can take to create more inclusive spaces that encourage men to share their stories, and really kind of where do we start, right? So William, I'd like to start with you, since Abhilash kind of already started talking about what they're doing at Within, but would you mind sharing your recommendations?
I think parts of it start with like updating the DSM to include more inclusive language. Like currently, one of the diagnostic criteria for getting diagnosed with anorexia is that you like lose your period, and most men don't have a period. There are some who do, but most men don't have a period to lose, and that makes it really hard to diagnose them with anorexia nervosa. I think adding diagnoses, getting more specific with eating disorders is another really important thing. I know that orthorexia nervosa is like more of a like talking point slash like eating disorder in theory at this point in time, but it truly is a real thing. And finding some kind of way to diagnose men with eating disorders that isn't like the colloquial bigorexia is like a really important step to take, so like making it clear in settings that like diagnoses aren't perfect and they're not everything, and that really all that matters is treating your symptoms and getting your life back on track, the things that you're going through back on track, rather than focusing on like, what is my diagnosis? Because when you get diagnosed with something like I have, OSFED, there isn't really clear clear diagnostic criteria that makes you feel really seen, so I think that that's an important part. I think also like establishing your space as like a place where like this conversation is between you and me, no one will know, that's really important because again, people are very concerned about protecting their masculinity, and at this point, because reaching out for help is like seen as like a bullet wound to someone's masculinity, like it's really important to make people feel safe when they do reach out for help. And it's really important to talk about this publicly as much as possible. I mean, that's not really a great answer for like, how do I make my individual space more accepting for men, but like at the end of the day, all new experiences are trial and error. And if you aren't having any men come into your space, you're not going to be able to make your space more inclusive for men because there aren't any men to make it more inclusive for. So really like encouraging men to come to your space in any way that you can. Maybe that might mean talking to the primary care doctors in your area and telling them like, if there are men who come into you who seem to have some kind of odd relationship with their weight or odd relationship with food, if their like walls are even see-through enough for the primary care doctor to see that, like maybe recommend that they come into my office. Like really finding ways to insert yourself or insert your name or a recommendation for your space into spaces where men already frequent is probably the best way to get men to enter your space. And then once you have men entering your space, you will be able to figure out what makes men feel most included in this area. You could even potentially, if you're comfortable with the men who are coming into your space, ask them, what would make you more comfortable here? What is making you uncomfortable here? Those are good places to start, I think.
Great suggestions. Abhilash, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
That's terrific. I want to make sure I understood also the question. Is it what, help me understand, is it what actionable things could be done to accomplish what exactly?
To create more inclusive spaces, and even taking it a step further to make more men feel comfortable sharing their stories is really like a second part to the question. So number one, how do we make it more inclusive? How do we make more men want to come in? And then really, how do we help them share their stories too?
Okay. I loved where William began with the DSM, and then all the way through where he ended with sort of awareness of space. I would add a couple things. One, to that end, right? We refine our language collectively, the people who are here, the people who are in the field. Two, I heard education. I love the idea of educating, and there will have to be educating physicians and other caregivers and other people in the healthcare apparatus. That doesn't happen without muscle, and that means that there have to be economic interests that help us get that word out. I'm also a digital marketer by trade, right, originally, and so I think there's going to be some pretty cool content marketing that we're going to have to do, and I imagine that if we make it anonymous, that there'll be more voices, right? If we do that digitally, there's probably a way to allow people to weigh in, to add their story or their notes or their opinions or whatever, if we made it completely anonymous. And I bet there's probably more people, if we actually put some weight behind trying to solicit these participation, there's probably quite a few. I've got to believe it, right? Because I'm not that unique. And there's others. Like, let's go find out. And so I imagine there'll be some work that we have to do. We have to roll up our sleeves and actually encourage, like, give a place for other men to speak up. But I love that idea. Like, what's actionable that we can do? It's going to be that. I think we start with our language and then really make a conscious effort. It's like learning a new language, right? If I want to learn a new language, it's one thing to go to the classes. It's another thing to actually practice with the people that I come across. Can I practice this language? And the difference between me actually being able to converse in that language and otherwise is if I've been practicing with the people I come across. That's what this is. So it's just going to be a function of, I think, like educating, creating change and awareness with the doctors. The next doctor I come across, I'm going to have that conversation with them, and every single time, and just keep it going that way.
Yeah, and adding on to that digital marketing piece, there's a lot of talk about how algorithms can be used for bad things, and algorithms left to their own devices are often harmful. However, algorithms are already accurately predicting on their own when people are going to interact with triggering content, because they provide that triggering content, because they've made an observation that, like, this person is mentally ill in this way, and they will interact with content that has to do with their triggers and has to do with their mental illness, right?
It gets watched.
So there is absolutely a very evil part of marketing culture right now that is considering using algorithms for things like, when an algorithm can detect that a bipolar person is not only bipolar, but also is having a manic episode, they can gear their algorithm to potentially advertise to them like gambling, and advertise to them things like really expensive purchases that they might be more likely to partake in when they're manic, right? And so I bring that up to say that you can use an algorithm to your advantage to market to people who might not know that they have an eating disorder. Market that educational material towards them. That's definitely a possibility.
It's so sad to hear that, you know, people are out there really preying on the vulnerable, and it's so horrific to even contemplate, but it's important for us to recognize that it's existing and it's happening.
I think the work, we did this research piece about, because we didn't think the Wall Street Journal or TikTok had gone far enough with the change that they were making, because people are still being served really dangerous pro-eating disorder content. We spent months and months and months and a lot of effort to put some research together that showed how much more triggering content was reaching people because of the workarounds that were still available, and the loopholes and the vulnerabilities that are still there in TikTok. And thankfully, the Wall Street Journal picked it up, and we're going to keep, publishing more of this research, because I don't think we can afford to stop. Mm-hmm. Like, it's in that same way, right? If we have to get the platforms to participate. I don't know that we'll be able to solve for spammers and programmatic advertising. But I think if we just keep making noise, right? Helping each other, supporting each other, let's give each other space, and let's build on our common cause of trying to help people who are suffering. I've got to believe that good things will happen.
Absolutely. And as we come to a close, I wanted to give each of you just 60 seconds each to end on a high note and talk about what's been the most fulfilling part of sharing your story and creating change by being an advocate. So I'll start with William.
I get messages every day where people tell me that my content has saved their life. And while I would never claim that, because I think that that is far too much responsibility for me to take on as a person creating content, I do sleep well at night knowing that the content that I've made has helped a lot of people save their own lives. And it's helped a lot of people reach out for help. And to know that I have done something that has like significantly improved the lives and like actionably improved the lives of people that I've never met before, that really, really sticks with me, and it's the most rewarding part of doing this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful byproduct of your efforts, right? Of knowing that you're making a difference. And again, even with people that you don't know. And I think it's like jet fuel for an advocate, right? It's like, this is why we do this. So Abhilash, what about you? Take us out on a positive note, most fulfilling part, or something that's really impacted you in a positive way.
I think the most fulfilling, it's tough to see. We're perfectionists, right? Like a lot of people who suffer from eating disorders, we're perfectionists. And so I don't think I'm there yet. I'm really proud of you, William, and I'm grateful for you. The most fulfilling parts to me, I think so far, are small, right? I've seen changes in my own life, in my own behavior, in the way I show up for the people around me, that makes me feel better, that I'm in the right place and I'm doing the right things. And the other, I would say that it's brought me closer to many other incredible human beings that share this common cause. Everyone that's here, everyone that's been involved and within in the summit and in the field, it's been incredible. There's so much energy, and it's well-intentioned, right? It's not selfish. It's just look, can we help people who are in pain and in shame? Like, you're fighting shame. Imagine that, right? And that's not an easy fight, but that's really a good one. And I don't know that there'll be a breath wasted if that's where I'm spending my effort, because my kids are going to see that, right? They're going to see that, hey, you know what? Like, it's okay. Not only is there a space for them, but I've gotten closer to a lot of people. You guys, I get closer to William here now, and all of these people have been amazing. Now, I haven't gotten those daily messages yet, but I do choose to believe that if we do this thing together, if we can enroll each other and get support and maybe have the ball bounce our way along the way, then there's going to be a lot of people who are going to create generational change. And that's what I'm after. So I don't know that I've been fulfilled in that way yet. I haven't seen that massive production of generational change, but that's what I'm after.
Well, I'm just going to future cast and say that you'll see it in your lifetime. You're doing amazing things, Abhilash.
We will. Hopefully
yeah.
we'll do it together. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you, Zach, for popping back on. Are you going to wrap us up?
Of course. Thank you. Thank you both, William and Abhi, for your perspectives today. And Allison, thank you for moderating. Great questions. Awesome discussion and great feedback in the chat. There's actually as a good segue to the tail end of the conversation today about social. There's going to be a chat, another session in about 15 minutes on learning how to turn off triggering content in news and social media. So for those of you that might want to check that out to continue the conversation, that'll be a good one. So hope you join us there. Other than that, thank you all for joining today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison and William, for being here and doing this thing.
Absolutely. This is great.
Thanks all.
Appreciate you both.
Bye.